Hello, Erica. Welcome to Potterwatch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Shall I introduce myself now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm Erica Andrus, and I am a senior lecturer in the religion department, and I'm also director of Jewish studies. And one thing I wanted to say is, like, when you invited me to join you here, you had said, come think about a question to ask that we can discuss, and etc. And you were very careful and polite and said it doesn't have to be about religion if you don't want it to be. And I thought that was kind of funny because, like, I teach religion, I think about religion, I teach about religion and popular culture and all that. And so it's not that, I don't want to do shop talk on my time off. It's more like when I'm talking about popular culture outside of the university, I always have to kind of rein myself in when it comes to religion. So this is like perfect. I get to just let my mouth.
I was hoping you'd bring a question about religion, but I didn't want to force it.
No, I appreciate that, but it's also like this is good for me. So I was thinking about religion and Harry Potter, and one thing that stands out is, like, first of all, there's just not much, so quote unquote, religion in the books. And then there was, of course, the whole controversy about fundamentalists or evangelical Christians who think Harry Potter is the occult and should be banned or burned or whatever. And so that got me thinking about this question of, like, okay, well, here are these people with their particular religious perspective, right? And they don't like these books because they incorporate magic in the books, as though magic is real. It's like in the world, it's a real thing. It's a phenomenon. And that's somehow, like, threatening to these religious people. And then the response to that from most people outside of evangelicals was like, that's ridiculous. Like, it's like a kid's book, it's fantasy, like. And also there was a lot of response like, well, if you look at the message, it's very compatible with Christianity, and in fact maybe the whole thing really is like a parable for Christianity, and there's death and resurrection, and the message of it is that we should all love each other. It's the golden rule, and, like, God is love and everything. So it really seems to illustrate to me, like, there's this different question about how do we define religion? Like, is religion something that is a message, or is it tapping into the supernatural? Like, what does religion even mean? So it kind of, for me, it's kind of an interesting way to think about how the evangelical subculture, like, envisions religion in a really different way. And actually, there was this, viral video last week of, what is her name? The woman who's like the special spiritual counselor to Trump.
I've repressed their names already.
Yeah, something. I don't, Paula something or something like that. Anyway, she's kind of going into this, like, Pentecostal rant about calling angels up from South Africa and from South America and to be in this. And it's really, a lot of people were like, whoa, what is this? But at the same time, if you see that, kind of understand why they're taking Harry Potter and their magic so seriously. That's the world they live in, where they really don't think it's fantasy. They're like, yeah, you can call dementors up and demons, and how, that's all real to them. So I don't know, that makes it seem like, okay, you can understand why they think it's threatening.
So I remember a lot of the really early opposition to Harry Potter. It was like the first few books. I mean, it may have continued throughout, but when they were coming out, like, one year after another, there were a lot of books to burn suddenly, and they were very, very, very angry. And I wondered, and I haven't really followed this, was there, by the time we got to the end of the series and we had much more of a kind of Narnia-esque ending. Did anybody stand down?
No, I don't think they did, because I think they were already too invested. I mean, I don't think there's like a theological reason they would stand down.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more of like a, social kind of. But I don't know. That's a really interesting question. There may be people who were persuaded at the end by the argument that, well, the message is really compatible with Christianity, so therefore, all of the stuff about magic is not to be taken so literally or seriously that way.
I've seen papers that discuss whether the magic is ornamental or whether it is like really fundamental to it. So I guess your initial question was, how do we define religion? And you would be the person to ask about this. To what extent do you think that any of this represents a real religion?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when I was reading it, I never thought of magic as religion because it's so instrumental. So, that's one of the kind of early religious studies distinctions. People were fascinated by this question of, how do we make the distinction between magic and religion? So what's religion to one person is magic to another person. And often magic just gets stuck on things that the label gets stuck onto things that you don't like or you think are superstitious, as opposed to religious. And the only reason to put the label on it is because you want to discredit it. But there are some theories that try to say, okay, well, magic isn't necessarily a bad word. It's just referring to a different kind of ritual practice. And it's a kind of ritual practice that that is instrumental as well as symbolic and all. So, it's about controlling things and making things happen in a way that maybe other kinds of religious rituals aren't, that other kinds of religious rituals are about controlling like the state of your soul or something more individual and kind of interior, as opposed to, like transforming physical objects in the world. So yeah, when I was reading it, I didn't really think of it having to do with religion. And so what struck me most about it was how secular the books are, and how really American that is. And but she's not American.
Right.
And yet, clearly it's, so that was sort of a question for me too. It's like, what difference does it make that she's British and she's writing this for a British audience? And although I guess there were different editions for using different words.
But I don't think the content changed very much.
Yeah, no, it's just like lorry instead of truck or something.
Mm-hmm.
At that level. But it does seem interesting to me that, because it shows that, well, maybe England is also in this kind of, just because they have an established church doesn't necessarily mean they're any less secular than the United States is, which is, an easy assumption to make, but maybe it's just not true. But certainly in the U.S., I do think there's a sort of imperative to always choose, A, to be religious or not, and B, if you're going to be religious, what religion will it be? Whereas in England, just like if you're born here, you're Anglican without, that's you don't have to think about it. It just comes with the territory, literally. So I don't know where I was going with that, but
we touched a little bit in class about sort of, we've got Muggle society, we've got Wizarding society, and ostensibly they're really separate. Like Arthur, even though he's the Muggle person in the ministry, can't use the money, can't figure out how to dress himself. So there's not a lot of overlap, and yet we see all these ways in which Muggle society really influences Wizard society. That they have this sort of default Anglicanism that they would celebrate. A sort of secular Christmas. They have, I like the parody Christmas songs. Get Rescue Mary hippogriffs and stuff. But they're clearly following this same sort of, like, as you said, default Anglicanism. But one of my students asked at one point, what do we think that they're supposed to make of Jesus? Is Jesus a magical figure, or what would be their relationship with Christianity?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I mean, that's something about, like, you know me, and I read a lot of like science fiction and speculative stuff. And that's one thing that always really bugs me, is if there's these sort of far into the future books where there's a society and there's either no religion at all, which seems unrealistic to me because it's just part of human society, but or there's like people there who are still practicing their religions exactly the way we do. Like, okay, so the fact that you've traveled to another planet, or like you've died and been resurrected on Riverworld, has no change to your worldview whatsoever. What kind of limited person are you? That's not gonna get you to question the nature of God. Anyway, so yeah, that was sort of one of my frustrations with the Harry Potter world, is that it does just kind of erase the religiosity, and it does leave that question open. Like, I mean, my impression is that the wizarding world just thinks that the Jesus story is something interesting and quaint about Muggles, and they don't interact with it at all. Mm-hmm. And so, that's kind of the way that secular atheist society treats religious people frequently. And I think, actually, now that you mention that, in many ways, the most kind of devout atheists are British, right? The Dawkins and what's his name, Hitchens, and these people who will set up debates between atheists and the Archbishop of Canterbury, whatever. Like, I just don't really see that happening in such a public way in this country. Like, people might do that in their local humanist society, and 50 people would show up and be really interested. But in England, it's like national television broadcasts.
Well, you're going to get Stephen Fry to do it,
Yeah, that's right.
It's also the audiobook for Harry Potter in the British version.
Oh, that's so funny. I didn't realize that. Yeah, he's wonderful. But so I think maybe that is that gives a better context for this question about the relationship between the wizarding world and the Muggles, is that they're just in the dark about reality. And so they need religion, whereas the wizarding world, they see what's really going on, and they don't need those imaginary stories about virgin births and things like that from 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's possible, yeah, that it reflects a kind of more developed form of atheism in British society than in American society. In American society, atheism is very much like the realm of libertarians, and I don't know, certain it's less respectable, I think, than it is in England.
Yeah. And it's attached to an elitism in some ways too in the US.
Yeah, I think in England too. I think there's definitely that sense of like the atheists think they're just too smart, to be suckered by religion. Whereas I think in America, yeah, that's the same attitude. But they're not necessarily people with that stature in society.
Right.
They're usually people who are more on the fringes because we have such a Christian hegemony here that, like, it's hard to get anywhere if you're an avowed atheist in politics, or even as a celebrity. Yeah. People don't talk about religion, but if you came out, quote unquote, as an atheist, there would probably be backlash here.
I'm thinking about how, like, in the US, there's tension between, and then perhaps in the UK too, that I guess I'm making a distinction in the Muggle world. There's a tension between religion and science, and in the wizarding world, they've used magic as sort of a substitution for science in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that. What is that? Is it Asimov has that great quote about science sufficiently advanced would be indistinguishable from magic.
I think it's Arthur Clarke, but
oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It's Clark. So they've got sort of this. If they've replaced science with magic, then it would have that same sort of maybe tension with religion.
It's like the inverse of the Clarke quote.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it means that if that's their substitution, then it would make sense that magic and religion would still be at odds.
Yeah, that they would take up the same niche, and therefore they don't really coexist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
But do you see any sort of, is there, like, we know that they have views on death in the wizarding world, and they seem to have, Harry, when Sirius dies, discovers there's this veil, and he has this conversation with Nick about ghosts and stuff. So
oh yeah,
do you think that, is there like a coherent through line to any of their beliefs that would approach a religious sort of thing?
I don't know. I mean, for me, like when I study about religion, I have to admit it's probably a shortcoming of my own, but all the like philosophy of it and the like what's really real and what really happens after you die, that's like the least interesting part to me. So like, yeah, I don't really know. Like, I guess I could think about the coherency of the afterlife beliefs in Harry Potter. It seems coherent, but I think you're right too that it's almost more like science, because these are things that can be seen and measured and predicted and repeated in the scientific method, right? So there's a certain tangible nature to these ghosts, even though they're not physically tangible, but you can see them and you can talk to them and you can sort of quote unquote measure them in that way. So it's still the realm, I think, like you're saying, of science more than theology in that. But I do think that, the whole world, so in studying religion in America, because we have this disestablishment where you have to choose your religion, there isn't an established religion that kind of unifies our American identity, right? So in place of that, we have civil religion, where our sacred texts are the Constitution, and our sacred sites are Washington, D.C. and Mount Rushmore, which don't even get me started, or the Grand Canyon or something, and we have holidays that celebrate our Thanksgiving, it's our civic religion. And certainly Hogwarts could be described as having a civil religion. And I think their Christmas celebration would be part of that. And just like in America, where the Christmas season is, I would say, has been absorbed into American culture to the extent that, many people who practice Christmas are not actually Christian, and so it's become part of our cultural identity that we have the Christmas season, and we try to let it bring out our best and our season of giving and sharing and trying to be loving to our neighbors and all this. And so it has sort of values that go with it, but not explicitly Christianity,
right?
For everyone. So I think you could certainly look at Hogwarts in that way, with having its its rituals, its symbolic, everything, all the symbols of everything, and its narratives as its founding narrative as part of its legendary creation story and all of that. And so then whether a function of magic or science or what have you, that becomes less important in terms of thinking about how people treat it as a religion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think honestly, the evangelicals may not have even anticipated the degree to which not the occult rituals, but Harry Potter itself was going to become a religion.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
Like in 1997 or whatever, they had no idea.
Yeah, no, I don't think they like that either, though. Like the idolatry of it, but certainly, yeah. I mean, and then the Harry Potter like world that exploded in the real world of dressing up and enacting and playing Quidditch and all of that becomes maybe possibly more than a fandom. And it may be the only fandom I think that rivals the Star Trek fandom in terms of rising to the level of being a religion. Just in the way that it establishes institutions, groups
and treats the text as sacred in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a canon, just like there's a Star Trek canon, and people argue over it and everything. But I think in one respect, it's really different from Star Trek that it's less of a television is always a group effort. And so even though Gene Roddenberry was, the vision of it, and he wrote his humanist manifesto and had a very clear picture, he's not here anymore. And it grew way beyond him even before he passed away. And there's just so many people involved in creating it. Whereas Harry Potter is very, like people, if they have a question, they ask the author, like
who's very, very ready to interact.
Just give an answer. And so that's it, in some ways a more like closed or controlled world. But I think people, a lot of fans just ignore that aspect of it. Some fans are really hungry.
Harry Potter fan fiction is
a
world unto itself.
Exactly. So it's that it doesn't necessarily play out the way she wants it to, which is true of all founders of religions.
True. All right, Erica, thank you so much for discussing Harry Potter and religion.
Well, I hope it's enjoyable for your students as much as it's enjoyable for me to get to run my mouth a little bit about this stuff.
No, this was great. Thank you.